Bayonetta is one of the most legendary action games ever created, an incredible concoction of unrelenting style and solid original mechanics. Combat in both of these titles almost feels like a dance. It's about fluidity and keeping combo momentum with little downtime, but it takes two to tango. As cool and talked about as these player elements like Witch Time, dodge offset, and a unique combo extender are, they need to mesh with great enemy design. Deep character kits can make for some impressive combo videos, but moment-to-moment gameplay isn't exciting if enemies are complete bores to engage with. So it's a good thing both of these games have a selection of hellish and heavenly foes who'll do their best to put Bayonetta down under. I want to concentrate on the superb Grace and Glory, this aggressive fan favorite duo that represent the first real skill filter of the game. They attack hard and fast, for instance using a few close-range rapid chain attacks that require consistent skill to avoid. This one launches you into the air for a series of slashes that you can't just mash to get out of and need to time dodges very precisely to duck getting stun-locked. Another favourite of mine is this series of 5 melee hits, chaining from the ground to the air before hooking onto the floor and swooping in for the kill. It's so good because it punishes complacency, briefly changing the enemy's position before testing the player hasn't dismissed their sudden departure by delivering 2 hits. They have a bunch of melee combos, so you can't just memorize the rhythm of one set of attacks and call it a day. But one-note enemies are extremely boring, so these melee swipes aren't their only offensive maneuver. The best enemies have genuine moveset variety. Grace has this slow fire tornado that's quite easy to get Witch Time off. Glory has this shockwave attack that spreads around the floor, and they've both got this cool launch where they use their claws as a tether to fling themselves at you from afar. Cause like with players, when you're giving enemies a fat arsenal of moves, if they're all functionally the same, what's the point? These goobers are designed for all scenarios. The fire tornado is a slow long-range attack that has some light tracking, while the ground lightning is an AoE that doesn't affect you if you're in the air. So the focus is still on the close quarters combat. After all, this is Bayonetta, a game about weaving around, doling out punches and kicks. But by giving enemies different moves for long-range scenarios, you guarantee 2 things. For one, it's not so easy for players to settle into patterns. Variety is the spice of life, so if your dance partner is just cutting the same old shapes, it's boring because you never have to mix things up and get around moves with different animations or functions. It's less an adequate foe to surpass and more a single move to get around. Secondly, it means that enemies never have to be kept milling around, staying in the background while you take some cheap shots, waiting to get close enough to use that one move they practiced really hard. Ignoring these 2 issues are why the slithery snake enemies are boring as hell. Dudes basically have one close range attack and one flaming rock attack from afar, which isn't even unique to this enemy, guys. Occasionally they'll come out of the water, but not often, and the first half of the fight is nothing to write home about. They just float around, have a great time. Yeah, more like uninspired. Smart decision basically making these cannon fodder when they came back for 2. By having a variety of attacks for different situations, the cooler adversaries can be kept active at all times, keeping you on your toes not just with slightly different variations of the same attack, but stuff designed for all manner of scenarios. You can't relax and think, I don't need to worry about him because he's all the way over there. Fella might throw you a spicy offensive. Of course, this is made all the more effective because enemies in Bayonetta don't wait their turn. Enemies are aggressive, not passive. So, older Zelda combat especially was designed for one-on-one duels, but here, if they're both in frame, they'll both have a go. You can't just concentrate on wailing on one enemy and forget about the other until you're done. This is why single enemies in Bayonetta, never show up on their wands. Even if a cutscene introduces just a single rude boy, you'll always have a sideman joining the fray to make things more hectic. And speaking of hectic, taunt a foe and they'll chuck out assaults with even less downtime in between. You've got to earn those extra combo points by dodging more frequent attacks. Obviously, with all this madness hitting you from every angle, there needs to be some clear telegraphing on attacks. Thankfully, Bayonetta is a master at this, almost always employing a coloured glow along with a very distinct sound effect. Now, Grace and Glory don't always have this glow, but they're still telegraphed very well. For instance, look at how Grace leans back, then drags their claws across the ground for this launch. There's also this recovery attack, which has 28 frames, and this one with about 22, just within that average reaction time for visual stimuli of around 1/3 of a second. Bayonetta can get away with pretty quick telegraphing because you can cancel just about anything into a dodge. There's low commitment to the combat, so if you still get hit with these warnings, it's squarely on you. do, except if you're just coming off a cutscene. Enemies in Bayonetta 1 are so aggressive they don't even wait for the cutscene to end to lay the smackdown. Actually, that was a terrible idea and I'm glad they got rid of it for the sequel. One thing I particularly like about these moves is the whole extendable limbs thing the GG boys have going on. Certain attacks like this overhead one show this energy tether, allowing their claws to overstretch what the model would allow for otherwise. It's not to an unreasonable degree based on the telegraphing, they don't stretch across the entire map, but it is enough to give them decent reach to pose a viable threat. But it's not just about all these offensive tendencies they have. How they deal with players' attacks is incredibly important too. One thing you absolutely need to nail in action games like these is an enemy's defensive capabilities. In a super fast one like Bayonetta, an important factor is hit stun, also known as staggering. When you hit an enemy, interrupting the action it was performing, sending it into a brief daze. In some games it's a necessity, timing an attack just well enough that you can interrupt what your foe's up to and gain the upper hand. Bayonetta has some very fast attack patterns, so if each of those punches and kicks send the enemies into hit stun, the odds would be tremendously in favor of the player. As long as you're close enough and have hit an attack button, you've essentially won. To counteract this, just about all of Bayonetta's enemies have a decent amount of super armor, which some of you may know as poise from Dark Souls, referring to the amount of hits or damage something will take before it's sent into hit stun. Enemies still take damage in this state, they're just allowed to go about their regular business at the same time. This inherently makes them more aggressive because on top of their frequent and varied attack patterns, there's the added wrinkle that not all of your hits will stall them. In fact, only Wicked Weaves are consistent in this regard, making dodge offsetting to finish your combo important for more than just looking sick. They don't have infinite super armor, then players wouldn't be able to influence the fight other than just how much damage they deal. Wicked Weaves were the one real edge over tough enemies in the original, but in 2 you can't even use them to launch mid-weight angels outside of Witch Time. Gotta make Umbral Climax relevant, I guess. If you launch them from the front, they'll also just block you out of nowhere to break your combo. Sure, there's some skill in getting behind enemies before you launch them, but it's way clunkier than allowing them to dodge naturally or giving them super armor to fight back. Don, who is in charge of player and enemy interactions in Bayonetta 1, said, "I absolutely hate enemies that automatically evade or counter at the exact moment the player hits the attack button." And while Grace and Glory especially tend to move around a lot, typically chasing you down but often leaping away, this isn't cheap. Unfortunately, Don's advice seems to have been largely ignored when it came to the follow-up, with characters like the Lumen Sage ghosting his way through Wicked Weaves. There's just not as much dynamism in something like this compared to the superb Jean fights from the OG. Typically, you'll have been dishing out damage long before they make a retreat. Lumen Sage's spooky dodges are why you never see him in any Bayo 2 combo videos. You can't do anything with him. He, along with a good few of 2's cast, rely way too much on Witch Time to beat. It turns things into a waiting game rather than a constant flow of strikes. As much as I really love Bayonetta 2, I can't ignore some of the weird changes to the enemy designs. I'd say it's more consistent than 1, but it never reaches its heights either. Hell, Hashimoto, enemy designer on the OG and director of the sequel, said he was tempted to just bring the original enemies back before realizing how boneheaded that idea was, only to bring them back in one part. But they still have the launch properties of Bayonetta 1? Was this intentional? If there's one element of enemy interactions I absolutely can't fault 2 for, it's how it improved the already awesome aesthetic qualities of the original. In both of these games, as you chip away at an enemy's health, its angelic appearance gives way to a disgusting, pulpy mess. It makes it incredibly satisfying to whittle these creatures down before the release of that fountain of blood. Bayonetta 2 only cranked this up, giving enemies unique reactions depending on what kind of animation and direction the punch you're using has. This gives even more tangibility to beating the hell out of these guys, lending more inherent joy to this already riveting system. But at the end of the day, it's these fundamentals that really count. Throw all of this into a witch's brew and you get this sublime fight system. And ramping up all these factors for hard mode shows Platinum's confidence in this system. Sure, hard mode mixes around enemy placements, health and damage, but fights themselves are also much more frantic. Enemies have less cooldown between attacks and their animations are faster. Compare Affinity's attack here, 23 frames compared to 39 frames. What's cool as well is on normal, Grace and Glory don't use their unique attack when their bro is still knocking about, but will once he dies. Then, Gracious and Glorious, their super hard gold counterparts, just use these moves whenever, and when When you knock the difficulty up to hard, Grace and Glory follow suit, busting out these long-range attacks at any time. Grace and Glory are already tough enemies to face for beginners, so their early encounters let players face these unique attacks in isolation, before they're ready to tackle them in a group battle much later down the line. Having enemies hit more often, faster, and using different moves in group battles on harder modes really tests how well you can deal with multiple goobers at the same time, especially on Infinite Climax, which removes the ability to use Witch Time. Now you've really got to nail getting those hits in between dodging fast attack patterns. Of course, that was removed in 2. Bayonetta got attention for the mental set pieces, over-the-top gore, and unabated titillation. But they had an excuse to use all that stuff because there was already such a strong foundation in place. Bayonetta is anything but style over substance. Both of these games, for the most part, shine in so many places. This series is one of a kind. I can't believe you made me buy this game 3 times, Sega. Stop it. There are loads of great encounters across both titles, but Grace and Glory are a fan favorite because they accentuate the best elements of these games. They're so exciting to play against because of their implacable intensity. Passive enemies are boring to fight against because they don't mix with this system about struggling to complete combos in the face of enemy attacks. I mean, wow, this wasn't a good idea. It doesn't even have limbs, which is kind of progressive, but means it can't hit you back other than with these claws or a shipload of missiles. What a dynamic fight. Design enemies to coincide with your core elements. Give them a utility from afar or up close and a variety of challenges to overcome, never allowing inattentive players to gain a huge upper hand on Muppets that don't fight back or settle into predictable patterns. One-sided combat can never be intense. The most fun encounters will always pressure players to do their best. You can have the biggest move list in the world, but unless it's fun to fight sandbags for 10 hours, put just as much love and care into those who fight back. Hey, if you like this video or any other content of mine and want to support the channel, I set up a Patreon page about half a year ago now. I sort of forgot to announce it on here, just had a sneaky little icon sitting in the corner of the very ends of my videos. So far it's helped a lot with buying equipment and such to make these videos, as well as the logo and an Adobe Premiere subscription, all of which I genuinely couldn't afford otherwise. I've got another broader scope video coming up, so any support, no matter how small, would just be fantastic. Don't feel you have to. At the end of the day, just sticking with the channel is enough for me. But if you want to go the extra mile, then the option's there with some little rewards as well. Whether you pledge or not, just make sure you play Bayonetta. If you haven't already, what the hell are you doing?